Welcome to our webinar. I'm excited to be doing another one of these. These are some of my favorite things that I get to do. My name's Jason Johnson. I represent the YTRI organization and really excited about our subject for the day as well as our panel. And we've got some really fun news as well as here's a teaser for you as well as a potential pending announcement. So this is great. Topic today is going to be lessons learned from early childhood education that apply to all students. We've got some really fun stuff to demonstrate for you today. Before we get into it, just a couple notes on the webinar. So welcome back, those that have been on these before, these live events. Always happy to have our friends back on. And for those that are new, this is kind of a fun space. It started in 2020 and has just snowballed from there. And this is a fun live online community, but it also kind of continues on in recording format after as well. We do have a live chat going on here, so you can engage with us while we're presenting. One thing I would recommend that will help out is in your chat, if you'll open up your chat box, the chat tool, take a look where you type in a message, and then right above where you type your message, there's a little drop-down menu. It says to, and then the drop-down menu is where you select who you're gonna share your message with. For some of you, it will default, and it will automatically share your comments with only hosts and panelists. So if your chat tool says to hosts and panelists, us as the panelists are the only ones that can see it. So if you're willing, I think it's helpful. It creates a nice energy in the chat. If you're willing to adjust that so it says to everyone, that will help out. Go ahead and adjust it so your chat says to everyone. And then after you've made that adjustment, go ahead and type an emoji into the chat that expresses how you are feeling about going back to school, coming back to school right now, because it is that time of year.
Pretty good.
Those are pretty good.
I like the smile with a little sweat.
The sweat drop, yeah.
That is awesome. All right, good. Well, I think we can all relate to many of those. We have the whole spectrum of different feelings. So awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for making that adjustment. And I did a quick look. Looks like everybody got their chat settings adjusted over as well. So thank you. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists and then get into the discussion. So as I mentioned, this is lessons learned from early childhood education that apply to all students. And I've got an absolute powerhouse panel today. We'll introduce our panelists. First, I will introduce Hans Magleby. Hans is the co-founder of the YTRI organization that I represent here. That's also the kind of the group that hosts these webinars. Hans has been a pioneer in student engagement, social emotional education, over 20 years of experience, has a rich background in technology, instructional design, product development, etc. Does a little bit of everything, known for his dynamic presentations and practical tools that help educators teach resilience and motivate youth. His commitment to using technology in education has made him a leading figure in the field. Welcome, Hans.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason.
What a nice treat to be able to have you on the webinar. We've done so many of these.
To be on it.
To get on one.
Once in a while.
Next, yeah, well, we'll have to get you back on another one. I know a person or two. I'll bet we can.
Don't go crazy. One's good for now.
Next, we have Morgan Thomas. Morgan is a dedicated early childhood educator with over 15 years of experience. Founded a preschool in Utah that focuses on resilience and social emotional learning through play-based education. Morgan's diverse background includes coordinating after-school programs, working as a liaison for the Utah Department of Workforce Services, and facilitating art and writing classes for LGBTQ youth. Her passion for early childhood development continues to inspire her innovative approach to education. Morgan, welcome. Super excited to have you on.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for that introduction.
Absolutely. And then I'm Jason. My name's Jason Johnson. I represent the YTRI organization. The YTRI organization has been around for about 20 years. We are a resilience program. We have specialized for the last 20 years in teaching, delivering, and helping other people facilitate the delivery of the skills and sources of resilience. My background is I'm a school psychologist, come from the world of public education. And for the last 8 years, I've been the director of training for the YTRI program. And so I get the opportunity to kind of go throughout the country, both virtually and in person, and talk about this topic of resilience that I'm very passionate about. Today, we're going to connect this concept of resilience into a little more specific setting and see what lessons and what ideas we can take away from it. And I'm really excited for that. So I'm wondering, maybe to kick things off, Hans, you've got, I think, the best perspective on this. Wondering if you could start us off by just talking a little bit about the history of this YTRI approach to resilience and what its previous relationship has been to a pre-K setting.
Yeah, you bet. Let me share my screen with you. Thanks, Jason. Kudos to Jason. He's been grinding it on the road for the last 2 weeks. Where were you this week, Jason? You did two different trainings.
Back to back. I was in Flint, Michigan, and then Freeport, Illinois.
Gotcha. And usually he's traveling so much that he doesn't even remember where he is. So that's pretty good that you were able to call those up. That's not so bad.
Checked my notes.
All right. Well, let me see if I can do this. So I wanted to share just a little background on where this comes from. I know several of you probably are familiar with YTRI or have been trained or have seen the program. Many of you may not know much about who we are and what we do. And like Jason mentioned, we are hosting these events, and we've been doing these really since, COVID hit, and we had to kind of pivot, make some changes organizationally in what we do. And then this is something we've continued because we feel like we've just had some great conversations with people around the country. And YTRI began it's been close to 25 years ago. I started YTRI with a good friend of mine. His name's Christian Moore. He's my old high school buddy. We're old friends. We met between our 8th and 9th grade year in school. He was living next door to me with his grandparents. He is also the author of our best-selling book, The Resilience Breakthrough. Christian's a clinical social worker. My background is in teaching. I have a degree in art. I was an art teacher. I've worked as an art director for a video game company. I've worked in a lot of different positions in technology companies, and then started YTRI kind of with some of my passion and some of Christian's experiences. Most of what we do comes from Christian's life experience. He, as a clinical social worker, when I met him and he was living with his grandparents, it was because he was struggling in his home environment. He had a difficult home situation. He was getting into a lot of trouble. He was really struggling in school. And so his grandparents volunteered to have him come stay with them. And Christian, kind of his claim to fame is he got a master's degree with about a 5th grade math level and a 6th grade reading and writing level. He was one of those kids that really struggled in school, was a special ed student, never really thought college was going to be an option for him. And I don't have time today to share his story, but if you ever get a chance to hear him speak and share his story, it's very inspirational and motivational. And it's kind of at the heart of everything that we do. While he was working on his master's degree, he had a professor pull him aside one day and said, "Christian, how have you made it through school this far? I'm amazed that you've accomplished what you have. You should write down, what you did to make it this far through school." And so he thought about that. And he wrote down the question, why try? Because that's what he was always asking himself. And when he was in high school, he didn't see that he had a future that was going to involve something that he was really passionate about. He thought college wasn't an option for a kid like him. He was going to be working some minimum wage job, doing manual labor most of his life. And it wasn't until he got into college and saw that he could become a social worker, and then working on a master's degree, become a licensed clinical social worker. That was like a dream to him. It wasn't until then that he started seeing the answer to that question. And he kind of wrote down, I want to have opportunity, freedom, and self-respect. And then he wrote down a series of principles that he felt helped him make it through school. And he showed that to his professor, and he said, that's great. Go teach that to some kids that you're working with in your internship. And so he was a school counselor in an alternative school, working with these kids, trying to explain to them these skills that he had learned. And he really quickly got frustrated because it turns out that as he would talk to them, they wouldn't listen. And all of you educators are probably nodding your heads going, yeah, that sounds familiar, right? And he was kind of second guessing if this was the right career choice for him. And so he was talking with one of his colleagues, a school psych, that said, Christian, I know why what you're doing isn't working. You're just talking to these kids and they're not good auditory learners. They're more visual learners, they're hands-on learners. And so he started trying something a little bit different. When kids would come into his office, he would sit down and start drawing. You know, he loved art, kind of like me. He would draw pictures for these kids. And as he was drawing, these kids that wouldn't listen would just focus in on the picture. And he would ask them questions, and at different spots around the picture, they would give him answers, and he'd write their answers on the picture. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, he'd finish the picture and he'd say, okay, if somebody asked you what this picture is about, could you explain it back to me? And it was like complete recall. They remembered minute details of what he had shared. And he thought, okay, great, they got it. He'd give them the piece of paper and he'd say, I'll see you next week. We'll talk again. And they'd come back a week later. And this time, instead of drawing himself, he'd put a piece of paper in front of the students and he'd ask them to draw what they remembered from the picture. And it was still complete recall. Like a whole week later, they were still remembering minute details of this. And sometimes they pull out of their pocket this folded up piece of paper, and it was the picture he gave them. They were still hanging on to it. And he was like, man, these kids never washed their pants. You know, why are they still hanging on to this picture? He couldn't figure it out. So he reached out to me at the time and he goes, Hans, can you explain this to me? You know, I talk to kids, they don't listen. And now, as I've been, you know, working with them and drawing pictures, it's a totally different experience. And as he explained to me what was going on, I said, well, I'm a visual learner. That makes sense to me, but I don't know if I have a good answer for you, but I want to see what you're doing. So we got together and we started brainstorming, kind of playing around with different ideas of things that we could do to, you know, teach these principles that he had come up with in the form of a visual metaphor and a visual picture. And it kind of evolved from there. We started adding other resources to it. We added activities, so object lessons and experiential activities. We added music as a resource. We added media and video clips and, you know, just a lot of different resources. It went from Christian using this after he graduated in a kind of a community mental health setting, working with kids one-on-one, into schools. I had a brother-in-law who was the first to kind of introduce this as a school counselor in a high school. And then, you know, it went from kind of one-on-one to small groups, even into a classroom environment where it was started, you know, people started using it as a curriculum to teach kids some of these lessons in a series, you know, all the pictures that we had created and developed. And, you know, our initial focus on these was focusing on teaching these skills of resilience, kind of like Jason mentioned. I was just going to share with you real quickly, kind of a quick summary of what they are. So we have, you know, this one talks about decisions and consequences, helping kids improve in their decision-making. We have one that talks about tearing off negative labels and kind of focusing on positive self-image. This one focuses on impulse control, emotional regulation, kind of anger management. We have a lesson here that focuses on the influence of our friends and peers and those around us. So peer pressure and the influence of others on us. We have one that's a problem-solving model. You know, we focus a ton on trying to motivate students, but if they don't experience success, we have to realize that if they don't know where to apply their effort and they're experiencing setbacks, it's hard to stay motivated. And so most people can be good at problem solving if they just understand the basic steps that people take. And we're trying to just teach them this model. This one is about hard work and determination. one of those really important skills we're trying to get students to understand. And it's an activity in itself. We'll have them go through this complicated maze with the words desire, time, and effort on it. They start up here, they finish down here, and it usually takes about 10 minutes to make it through. And there's a whole bunch of things that happen as they go through this, as we process it with them. And one of the things I like to do as kids are getting close to the finish, they're just about done with the maze, is rip it out of their hand and steal it from them. And they get really mad when you do that. It's one of my favorite things, actually, but because their reaction is so strong. And I'll say, why are you upset? Time out for a second. Think about this. Why are you so mad that I stole this maze from you? And they'll say, well, duh, I just spent a bunch of time and effort, and you robbed it. You pulled it away, and I didn't get it. Again, you didn't get a chance to finish it. And I'll say, okay, so the feeling that you have, that's what we call the accomplishment zone. That's the feeling that you get when you work hard at something and you accomplish it. It makes you feel good. And I robbed you of that experience, and that's why you're mad. Anything in life that's worthwhile takes hard work. There's no shortcuts. So we kind of process things like that with them. This one is about the importance of laws and rules and the things that are expected of us. We take something that students see as kind of a negative, and we relate it to something that's positive that helps make us stronger. This one is about support systems and relationships. A lot of times kids feel like if they have to get help on something, that's a sign of weakness. And so they're afraid to ask for help. And we want them to not only recognize the importance of getting help, but to see it as a strength. It's the opposite. It's actually a strength, not a weakness. And so we go through different connections and support systems that students have. And then, that kind of brings us back to this one, which is sort of a summary of everything. It's having a vision of where you're going, having a limited view, kind of like that kid standing in front of a brick wall. They don't really see, what's ahead of them or where they're going. They just see the problems that they're dealing with at home, at school, in different areas of their life. And so our goal is to try and put kids in a position where metaphorically, it's like they're standing on top of that wall and they can see beyond it and they can see where they're going. And each of the steps that we try and help them see to get up on top of that wall are those skills that we're teaching them. Well, so these were kind of the principles that we had identified that helped Christian, and that we created as visual metaphors. These were the original metaphors that we created in the program. We skip through here. We ended up, having a conversation one day where I was sitting at lunch with Christian, and he was venting to me as a therapist. He was saying, "God, I'm making progress with these kids. I teach them these skills, but then it's so frustrating. They go home, they go back to their family or their neighborhood or their friends, and a lot of the progress that we make goes out the window." And I said, he's like, "I can't get rid of their problems. It's so frustrating." And I said, "Well, Christian, you're just a social worker. You're not going to get rid of their problems. But what else can we do? How can we help them to be motivated and to, kind of push through those challenges and problems?" And as we had this conversation, we came up with a 10th metaphor, an extra one that wasn't something that he had identified. And it was really kind of a problem-solving model for the people that were teaching these skills to kids. It wasn't really intended for us to have someone go through this. It was something that we were kind of trying to help educators understand and put into practice. Things that they could do to form a connection with the kids they're working with. And it was kind of all around this relationship that they create, and then how they can help them channel the challenges that they have and use them as a source of fuel or as a source of motivation. And so we never really intended that it would be taught that way, but it was kind of interesting. I had early on, it was included in our tool, kind of our little binder that was a toolkit that people would use to take these skills that we were teaching and our resources and use them with kids in individual and group settings and classroom settings. And I was at a counseling conference in Nevada with the School Counseling Association there, and a person came up to me. This was probably one of the first 2 years of Why I Try. A person came up that had been through our training, had been using the program, and they said, "Hey, I got to tell you a story. I used the motivation formula with a group of kindergartners, and it was so amazing." And I said, "Wait, you did what? You taught motivation formula to kindergartners?" And she said, "Yeah." And I kind of thought, well, we don't even teach that to high school kids or teenagers. We felt like it was a little too cognitive, too difficult to understand. It wasn't something that was really intended for that. But she went ahead and adapted it on her own and taught it. And I said, "Tell me how you did it." And So in here, there's this concept of challenges. When we have challenges, we have some strong emotions that come from those challenges, and there's some initial energy. And you can take that energy from the challenges we have at home, at school, with friends, and either go in a positive direction, like a river that's channeled through its path, or in a negative direction, like a river that floods. And, we call that the flood zone. And then, she said, well, I created a sand tray, and we created a river, and kind of made these little dams like it has in the visual metaphor. And we kind of talked about what happens when there's a flood. And she said, we poured some water in and shows what happens when there's a flood. And then she showed the different pieces to the metaphor that are focusing on different aspects of these skills that we try and have them use to channel their energy in a positive direction, and to use the energy that comes from the challenge as fuel. And so the first one is positive self-talk. And she said, I read for them the story, The Little Engine That Could. I think probably most of you are familiar with this one. The little train has to pull the help out because the main engine broke down. So it has to pull this circus up over the top of a mountain. And, the whole time it's the self-talk of the train. I think I can, that he's going through. So it was a good illustration, an example of what it means to have positive self-talk. And then, she walked him through some of the other things. I can't remember all the details of what she did, but she shared with me some things that she had done to adapt it, to talk about character and heart and a passion, purpose, or interest, and getting plugged into support systems, which are the other elements of the motivation formula that she used to adapt it. And then she said, I have to tell you the story of this one kid. He was really struggling. And I noticed that, after about a month after we had taught some of these things, his behavior had improved so much. And I was talking to him one day and I said, hey, I'm so impressed with how much you've improved, in the last little while. What's the difference? Why are you, behaving so much better in school? Or, why is your behavior so much improved? And this little kid said, I just realized that I didn't want to be in the flood zone anymore. And so she just said, I couldn't believe that he not only understood the concept, but he used the language in the right way from what we had taught in this visual metaphor. And it had applied to the point that it helped change his behavior. And so I just thought, okay, when COVID hit a few years ago, well, I actually went back and had my sister, who was an elementary school teacher, kind of create some initial lessons for us in elementary. And we created sort of a series of activities and resources along with what we did in secondary, and kind of had two versions of the program. And, we've always had them combined on our website, so everybody has access to them, because there's a lot of things that we do, with younger kids that maybe I'd want to also do with older kids. And so we just wanted to have everything there available. Well, when COVID hit, we saw a lot of the problems that we were dealing with individually with students in kind of small groups in kind of your tier 3 and tier 2 settings really started to spread into tier 1. A lot of behavioral issues, a lot of mental health challenges with students were coming to the surface in all populations. And we saw the need for, especially in an elementary setting with early intervention, to put together more resources and more, not just a toolkit, but ready-made lessons in scopes and sequence that were adapted to different developmental levels for elementary. And so we, Jason was a huge part of this. As a school psych, he was very much involved in helping adapt and make some changes. Corey Anderson, who's one of our trainers, he's also our director of curriculum development. He's a former elementary teacher and elementary administrator, principal. And we kind of pulled together our team, and we started playing around with different ways that we could adapt the things that we teach in a secondary setting to elementary at different developmental levels, and kind of broke it down by some of the key principles that we're teaching. Maybe there's a simpler version of it, or just an aspect of it that we would maybe want to focus on as we go down younger, not teach everything to the extent that we would with some of the older kids. And we came up with different visual metaphors. So we started adding new visual metaphors to the resources that we have for these lessons, still teaching the same skills. And so here's one that I wanted to share, just a brief example. This is an example of the crabs in a pot metaphor, where we talk about peer pressure, peer relationships, and influence. And as we adapted it down to younger grades, we went to a metaphor that I really like. It's one that we created in a scope and one that we created in a scope and sequence with some lessons centered around this metaphor of capybara. There's a picture of it. So going from climbing out to a metaphor of using capybaras. Capybara is kind of known as the world's kindest creature. We found a little YouTube clip that talks about how they interact with a lot of other animals. And instead of talking about peer pressure and the negative effects of those around us, we wanted to talk about friendship and what are the things that we can do in a positive way to kind of go to the heart of building relationships and friendships. And so here's a picture of a capybara that is kind in that they include others. So they've included others as an important way to be kind. And how can we do that at school? Often you see pictures of capybaras with other animals. They love water, and they'll see them giving, rides across a river or something with other animals on their back. And so helping others is an important way to be kind. How can we do that at school? And then looking out for others, is a third way that we focus on being like a capybara, that we're being kind is looking out for others. And how can we do that in school? And so, I love that we had this connection here. And some of these resources, we thought, okay, these would be great. Let's put them up here. And we ended up adding a lot of activities, new metaphors and things that are great, that even if I was teaching this with older kids, some of those I think are still a good lesson and a good resource to have. And so it's nice to kind of have them as part of a toolkit, but we also have them in a series of pre-built lessons as a scope and sequence. And, even in the elementary setting, we use a lot of resources around stories and story examples from children's books. Like one of my favorite ones that I've used with Climbing Out, I like to do those with my high school students. I've shared this story many times. It's a story of a young boy in China that has this gift for growing flowers, and he ends up being part of this big contest to see who can grow the greatest flower. And he doesn't know that it's rigged, that nobody's going to be able to grow. And all of his friends end up cheating, and they hugely try and pressure him to cheat, but he doesn't. He kind of shows his character, and he avoids the negative influence, and the reward that he gets at the end of the story is incredible. And coming back and processing that story to the concept that we teach in Climbing Out is a great thing. And it's that power of taking the visual metaphor, taking an idea and processing it back through stories and examples that help kids relate to this and see how it applies and relates in their life. That is kind of the unique thing about Why Try. I think it's the thing that's different from what we do compared to any other programs that are out there. It's that use of visual metaphors. And so we put it all together in our toolkit, and we have elementary resources, secondary resources. And then this year we've had just a lot of requests from multiple customers, especially a big group out of the state of Maine. I know we've got some Maine people on the webinar today, really requesting that we make some additions to the program for earlier. Even, if you noticed in my vertical alignment, we have grades 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, but we don't have kindergarten. We intentionally didn't develop this specifically for kindergarten because we felt like there's a real developmental shift from kindergarten to first grade, and it felt a little out of our area of expertise. Even with Corey as an elementary principal and school teacher, he brought in the fact that when you adapt things down to kindergarten, you have to have special training. In most states, you have to have a special certificate to teach kindergarten because of the significance and the developmental difference. And we just didn't know if what we were doing would apply at a younger age or a younger developmental level. And so they kept pressuring us, saying, we need more. We want resources for kindergarten and preschool. And so we thought, okay, let's explore our understanding here and then see if we can get some advice from experts out in the field. We sought some consulting from some people here at a local university that has a great early childhood development program. And then we connected with Morgan and, kind of introduced Why Try to her to see what her thoughts were. And I don't know, Morgan, do you want to just share what your impressions were when we first kind of approached you on this?
Yeah, I was excited when Jason reached out. I had known Jason previously to learning about Y-Tray, and we had some conversations just as educators around resilience and kind of what he did as his job. And I was always interested in asking him questions every time I would see him. And so when you guys were looking at maybe creating a preschool kindergarten adaptation of your program, he and I talked, and I remember the first meeting that you brought me into, you kind of laid out Y-Tray exactly like you just did here for us today. And then you both kind of looked at me and said, like, what do you think? Do you think that any of this is relevant? And I just remember feeling like so excited of like, yes, this is relevant. Like, I think my immediate response was, this is everything I do in my classroom. Like, this is the work that I do. It's very relevant. And in early ed, we're really focused on social and emotional learning and development. And as you laid out the program, what I saw was principles that seemed universal, like the principles of resilience felt universal across age levels. But what I really saw was the work of play throughout your lesson plans. That's what I really related to, because play is the work of preschool. And I was just really excited that you guys were willing to take on, like, even be willing to look at something that most people have either looked away from because it's intimidating, or it's just felt too big, or they've just avoided it because it feels difficult, right? But just to see that you guys were willing to kind of like step over that boundary that's drawn between early ed, pre-K and kindergarten, and traditional learning that starts in first grade, but to do it in a way that was very intentional, like you wanted to develop a program specifically for early ed and the way that preschoolers and kindergartners actually learn. That was really exciting for me. And in terms of play, I think about, like, play is a fundamental building block for development in early ed. And I think the ties of the connection to resilience and play is something that we often overlook. And so I was pretty excited about that. But I think to understand the connection between play and resilience, you kind of have to understand the science behind it. Like the science of development, to see how they both overlap. And like resilience is your ability to cope, your ability to do well, your ability to overcome like adversity and challenge. But it doesn't occur in a single instance or in a vacuum. It's something that we build over time. And it's something that we build within the context of our relationships and within our environments. And it starts really early, like even in infancy, we're starting to build those skills of resilience. And environment has a lot to do with that. And it's not just like the environment that you're in, but it's how you react and interact with that environment. And children are always looking to master their environment, and they do that through play. Like children, no matter their circumstances or where they are in the world, like just as humans, young kids are looking to like figure out who they are and develop skills through the process of play. And they have just like this innate desire to master their environment. And I thought that's kind of as close to the definition of resilience as you can get, right? Like resilience is learning to master your environment. But like young kids can't do it on their own. They need an environment that's manageable. And they need adults who can help kind of lead them through experiences and with guidance, and programs like Y-Tray as resources to kind of help them start to develop those skills. So I was pretty excited about the opportunity and the work of developing the program for preschool.
That's awesome from both of you. If it hasn't become fairly clear or obvious by this point, Hans, perhaps there's an official announcement you'd like to make?
Yes, yes. You know,
Sorry, I should have checked with you on that. I wasn't sure like what you'd
no,
shared or
no,
if
I love
this
it. I
was
love it.
the
It's totally great. Yeah, so the last, you know, almost 6 months, we've been working closely with Morgan and a focus group of people in the state of Maine that have been kind of piloting this. The tools are now live on our toolkit on our website, where we have a scope and sequence of lessons that are kind of built out to apply these you know, these same concepts and lessons to kids at a kindergarten and preschool level. And it's been really fun working with Morgan on this, because I feel like, you know, we would kind of brainstorm, okay, how do we take this? What would we do to adapt it? How would the processing be a little bit different? You know, if we're using the same metaphors that we use in grades 1 and 2, but would we talk about it slightly differently? And then what activities or games could we play? You know, I love how, Morgan, you're saying how important play is in building resilience. You know, if any of you have read Jonathan Haidt's book that just came out this year, The Anxious Generation,
Mhm.
very interesting. Recommend it to any of you if you haven't read it, but talks about so much of the importance of unstructured playtime that kids are getting at a young age, that is so critical for their ability to kind of experience working through things that are hard and challenges and social
Yeah.
interactions, and then see how, you know, that helps become a foundation for them that really has a huge impact on them later in life.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why we're seeing such a problem with mental health among teens is that they missed out on so much of that.
Yeah.
I
And
love
so
it.
it's been fun. I've loved working on this with Morgan, and we wanted to share, you know, some of the examples of some of the resources that we have, and share, you know, one of our lessons today that you guys can kind of take away. If you don't have Y-Try, or if you haven't used it, we'd love to, you know, we'll provide some resources at the end that Jason will share with you.
Yeah, we'll
But
put up contact info as well. What I was hoping for with this is kind of maybe two parts to each demonstration, because I think we have a unique opportunity here with Hans and Morgan. And by the way, full disclosure, when we first started, so Corey and Hans and I had been completing the elementary, kind of the formal elementary content, and when we started exploring building this out for pre-K. Morgan was the first name that I mentioned, and I pushed hard for her involvement. She has been an educator for my own children, and so I had kind of a unique insight into her approach, and we had a lot of really good conversations, and so I was really excited the way it came about. So I think we have kind of a unique opportunity here where we have a real expert on how these came together that can show us what some of these resources look like. And then I think the benefit for really any educator on here, regardless of what age group you work with, is Morgan really is an expert when it comes to taking these ideas and what her approach is in a pre-K setting, and putting that into, I think, really nice terms for us. So what it would be nice, maybe Hans, we'll go through what we have time for. Maybe if you can show us one or two of some of the pre-built content that we have for pre-K. And then Morgan, what I would love to hear from you, in addition to your experience with it, is any additional thoughts that you might have that are kind of useful key considerations that help you out in a pre-K setting, because I think there's a lot of those that can help all educators out that sometimes we just don't, we look past a little bit. And so that's what I'm hoping for, if you two are game for it.
you bet.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen one more time, and I'll pull up. So I've got a couple lessons I think that will be fun to share, some examples, and some of these, it was really fun as we were developing these. Morgan would take them and put them into practice with her class and kind of test out some of the games and the ideas that we had. And, you know, it was really kind of fun to get her experience with this. So as I go through these, I'll kind of give you a little bit of the framework of what the adaptation was and the lessons that we used. And
Yeah.
then maybe Morgan, you can kind of share sort of what you did with your students and how it kind of went as you were processing it. And then You know, we've built these into lessons with, you know, specifics on even the wording, how to frame some of this for your students so that it's easily understood at their developmental level. And
Yeah.
so this is one that I think is a good example. So, you know, we call this metaphor the reality ride. It's the first one that we focus on usually in the program with kids, where we're establishing the idea of how the choices you're making today are having consequences, and those consequences are impacting, you know, opportunities that you have down the road and in the future. And sometimes they're having consequences that are impacting you right now. And
Yeah.
so it's a little bit more complicated concept or idea. And so the metaphor, you know, that we're using is the roller coaster like we do, but we do it from a first person perspective, as though you're on the ride and this is what the roller coaster looks like moving forward. And to keep it more simple for preschool and kindergarten ages, we just wanted to, we didn't want to use the word reality. You know, as we talked about it, we thought that's maybe something that we'd be processing that's a little bit more advanced for them, and they may not, you know, fully understand what that means.
Yeah.
So we kind of pared it down to, you know, choices that are helpful and choices that are hurtful, or, you know, choices that are,
I think we did just helpful and like not helpful.
yeah, not helpful, right? You know, choices that are not helpful. And then at that point, when we have moments where we have to make a decision or make a choice, that we follow kind of this strategy of stop, feel, so recognize your feelings, think, and choose. And so kind of introducing through the metaphor just this basic concept, or this basic principle. Anything you want to add to that, Morgan?
No, I think you keep going. You're good.
Okay. So then one of the things Morgan did with her class, which I thought was really fun, is she kind of came up with this just simple activity. Why don't you explain this, Morgan?
Okay. So
happy track.
when I first, Reality Ride was one of the trickier ones, as far as like, how complex it was, and it's like,
there's a lot to
you know,
process there, right?
there was a lot to process. I, with my preschoolers, really chose to focus on just the idea of like having an experience rather than initially, rather than you're making a decision or a choice. And we talked about the concept of a track and how a track leads us somewhere, and we can have an experience along the way of that track. So what I did was just, I cleared a spot on the floor in my classroom, and I took masking tape and I just made a few different masking tape line tracks on the floor for them to follow. I made one that was like a zigzag, one that kind of curved, and one that was straight, one that was a little more boxy. And then we just had them pick a track and follow it with their feet, and they balanced across. And then I kind of just said, you know, like, how was that? What'd you think of that? And they're like, oh, this is fun, right? And I said, okay, great, let's do it again, pick a different track. And we kind of just played that way for a minute. And I had them just kind of point out the differences in the track, like which ones were easier to follow, which ones were a little bit trickier to balance on, which ones they thought were more fun. Just to introduce this idea.
They were kind of just walking along the track, right?
Yeah. Just had them balance on the tape line across the track. And then everyone kind of landed on the idea that they liked the zigzag one the best. So we left that one, and I peeled up the other ones, and then I just said, let's continue this track. And let's take it from, it was kind of on one end of my classroom that is the opposite end of kind of where we gather for circle time. And I said, let's continue making it all the way to the circle time room. That'll be our goal. And I let them kind of choose which direction they wanted it to go. We kind of like, one of them, they wanted to go under the table. And I think fundamental to resilience is like this need to be an active participant in your environment, rather than just like a recipient of it. And it was a very like kind of empowering thing for them to create their own track. And then we followed that track into the circle time room. We sat in there in a circle, and we kind of talked a little bit about the different experiences on the different tracks. And then they wanted to keep going. So I let them form their own track together collaboratively from one end of the room to the other and issued challenges. We made a track that was that had the least amount of obstacles, the least amount of things in the way. And then we made another one where I said, see if you could make a track that you'd actually run into the most amount of obstacles, that would be the hardest for us to get through. And then one that would just be the funnest. Like, how many things can you pass by as you follow this track? Like, do you want to wrap around the table or pass by the cubbies? And that was kind of the approach that I took with it. And then we sat and we discussed it again. And I just drew the parallel of choice there and just said, like, a track is like a choice we can take. You know, we make a choice that can help us get somewhere. And some choices are more helpful and some are less helpful. And I mean, that was pretty much what it encompassed in that concept. And it felt like they understood. And I tried to like stay out of the territory of good or bad, better or worse. And kind of tried to strip it of like moral value in terms of consequences. And that's something I'm really careful with in preschool. Like, I kind of wanted them to understand, like, there are just things we do that are more helpful than others, right? Like Jason and I kind of talked about this a little bit as far as, like, if we were to say, because we toyed around with the idea of like helpful or harmful, right? Instead of good or bad. And we tossed around those ideas. But ultimately, there are a lot of behaviors that children have that aren't really harmful and they aren't really wrong, but they're not all helpful.
Not helpful. Yeah.
In
Exactly.
the goal what we're trying to do, either individually or collectively. So
Yeah.
we celebrated the
Yeah.
track. We talked about the process of how fun it was to create them and the difficulty and how we got through that and the different strategies that we used for the different tracks, and it was pretty fun.
That's awesome. One of the things Morgan kind of helped us do as well is connect to a lot of different stories and examples. We ended up adding, you know, for each lesson, some different storybook examples that are kind of ways again to process it. So I love that, you know, we take the visual and then, you know, through that sort of play or that activity, got to experience it and understand the concept of the visual a little bit more. Then we have some stories. I won't play this one, but, you know, we'll use a children's book example. And sometimes, you know, just looking at, even if people don't have the story, they can look at a read aloud video from YouTube on it.
Yeah.
That shows kind of the principle, and being able to pause it and talk about some of the things in that story can be another way to process.
Yeah.
And then almost everything that we're doing is involving some kind of a resilience booster activity that we, you know, either have an art activity or a music activity or different resources. And I thought this was a fun one that Morgan did. You can explain this, Morgan.
We just took monster trucks and some tempera paint, and I gave them some paper. We rolled out some butcher paper too, and they just rode those trucks through paint and made their own tracks. And we just kind of through that process of play. And I mean, it was just as simple as that, understanding that tracks go places, we make tracks, they leave it, they have an impact. You know, there's all those different aspects of it.
Yeah. And then, you know, with all these, we would kind of create sort of a why try wall where we would put their artwork up.
Yeah.
Have it be a resource then that we could throughout the week come back and process and talk about that connection that we're making between, you know, this idea of the metaphor of the track and the connection to choices, and being choices that are helpful and choices that sometimes are not helpful.
Yeah. And the way that I tied those questions about choice with the stop, think, feel, and choose was in the process of making tracks.
Yeah.
Kind of like we'd come to a roadblock or a place where it was time to add another piece of the track and just stop, think about where we want to go, and then choose which direction. And then in this process art activity, we talked a little bit more about the feel, like in the stop, think, and choose. Yeah.
Yeah. You brought that in. What was the value of the feel in your mind? I remember, because that was something that was different.
Well, I brought in the feel because I think that is the emotional regulation aspect of resilience in development. And I think it's important when we say like stop. I mean, this is all a metaphor, right? Like this is a representation, but we're talking in terms of behavior and actively making choices, which ties into this full lesson plan. That when we stop, and we're often trained to go straight to think, and we skip the feel. And the feel is where sometimes we get in trouble, when we skip that feel, that's where we get into trouble, because we try and think solely our way out of problems, right? And we ignore what we felt. And so much in preschool is, like if I give you a scenario of two kids in a conflict and they're fighting with each other or fighting over a truck or whatever the scenario may be, they like that stop and then acknowledge how this feels in you, whatever the emotion is that you're feeling. Then
that.
think about what might happen or what you would like to have happen, and then choose. And there's just something about that feel that gives them a pause, a moment to pause that is directly tied into regulation. And
Yeah.
I mean, resilience is essentially a form of regulation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we'll get into that in more depth in other units and another lesson where that is the key concept that we're focusing on. But it's so nice when you see it kind of just come to the surface a little bit in Reality Ride when they're teaching that, or the helpful track in this case, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about this one briefly. We've got a few more minutes here. I want to give them at least one more example here. So plugging in is one of the lessons we really emphasize a lot in the elementary, scope and sequence of lessons, because we feel it's such an important thing. It's that idea that getting help isn't a weakness, it's a strength. We want to really reinforce the importance of students recognizing the value of relationships and positive relationships that can help you along the way when you have challenges. And so one of the metaphors we use in grades 1 and 2 that we ended up adapting and kind of following along the line with this in pre-K and K is just the metaphor of collections. When we collect things, a collection becomes stronger as we get it to grow. We add more things and more variety of things, so we have different examples of collections that kids might have, if it were Legos or Pokemon cards or, rocks or something. The more variety you have, the stronger your connection becomes, or your relationships are the same thing. And so in our first lesson, Morgan shared this example, and then it was kind of an idea from a storybook, but I love this. Do you want to explain this one, Morgan?
Is this the growing circles?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you introduced the concept of collections to me, in terms of relationships and support, I immediately thought of an activity that I do with my preschoolers around this very thing of relationships, is the circles, growing circles all around you. Do you have a slide of do you have one where it shows the multiple circles around them?
Yeah, I do. It keeps going here. Let's see. Next one. Sorry. There we go. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, just so that it's, like the centered circles. So with this one, I talked with the kids about emotional safety, and what that feels like in ourselves and in our relationships with people around us, our caregivers, our friends, our teachers, and had them, we sat on the floor with butcher paper. They each had a piece of butcher paper, and they sat with their knees tucked, crisscross applesauce, and they drew a circle around themselves. So we talked about the first circle starts with you inside of it. And then I asked them about other people in their lives that they felt close to or safe with, like your parents. And we drew a circle around that. And then another circle for teachers, and kind of build out from there. And it really just kind of gave them an idea of boundaries, right? Like you're seeing the different rings of different levels of safety that it represents, kind of helps you understand the relationships in your life, and just that sense of being held within something. And I apologize. It has been windy and rainy here in Utah, and I have had the worst
Allergies?
Allergies, yes. I thought maybe I could fake it and fight through it and my voice would get dry, but
No
here
worries.
it is.
You're doing great.
And I thought that kind of tied in nicely and was like a good age appropriate visual around the idea of relationships and safety there. And we talked about collections too, and we went around the school grounds actually, and I encouraged them to look for small rocks. And we made a collection of small rocks. And then I encouraged them to go and see if they could find a rock that was just a little bit bigger. And they brought it over and collected it, eventually to sticks and leaves. And we kind of just talked about how when something is important to us and it means something to us, we like to hold it close. And it can look like in the form of a collection.
Yeah, I love that. And then let's see, I'm trying to get out of this slide here. Yeah, we had this is, you know, a storybook that kind of introduces that same concept and the same idea. And, you know, the concentric circles, you know, that our relationships to the world and to everything around us, you know, start small and expand outward.
Yep.
And so, you know, being able to take that activity, creating their circles, and then maybe sharing this storybook with them, giving you an opportunity to kind of process it. We do that. We also had this activity as part of, you know, kind of an art project where we have kind of a template for a shape of a heart that they can trace and then color in. And then we have them kind of turn it into a character to put eyes and a nose and a mouth and arms and legs on it. That kind of we process to talking about us, who we are, and then do the same thing where we start doing the outline around that and extending it into circles on their paper. And then at the end, taking these and putting those up on the Why Try wall so students can have their picture that their heart that represents them.
Yeah.
And then have repeated conversations about that throughout the week where we're reinforcing that concept and that idea of you know, expanding circles and expanding our relationship and our connection to others, and why that's so important.
Yeah.
Awesome. This is fantastic. Really, really well done. We're excited. The help we've gotten on this from Morgan, and then a ton of help. We've developed a really nice working relationship with some friends in the state of Maine that are very involved in with the Department of Education and working to support kiddos of all ages in Maine. But that's been a really important relationship for us as well. And I feel like we definitely need to shout them out for helping and encouraging us, and also giving some really important feedback on this. So what we want to do, I've got a surprise question for Hans and Morgan because we're all about surprises. The surprise question
Keep us awake.
yeah, it shouldn't be too bad. But while I give you the surprise question, I'm going to put up a screen, and Hans has been very generous in wanting to get some of these resources that we shared today in the form of sample lessons to anybody that was on here or views it in the YouTube video. So we've got a QR code here that you can hit, and if you'll hit that, it'll ask you to go through it's maybe 30 seconds worth of response to it, and then that'll get you a link where you'll be able to go to a landing page that has some sample resources of what we showed today. The other thing I do want to mention before I give you our surprise question is I think I'm okay to say this. I didn't even ask Hans's permission, but we are going to be starting a podcast version of these webinars. We've got about 80 of these, and we are not going to be slowing down on them anytime soon. And we've gotten feedback that it would be nice to be able to listen to these sometimes in a little more convenient space. So we're going to be starting within the next few weeks a podcast. Keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll send out an official announcement, but super excited for that. All right, here's the question. I want to hear from you. In 5 words or less for both of you.
I I just
In-
immediately saw this as a
Okay,
competition. Did you see that?
impossible. No.
In 5 words or less, what is something that you either learned or was reinforced that you already knew, but was really reinforced in your mind, that came about while you worked on these, that would be a useful reminder or takeaway for any educators? So in 5 words or less, what's something you either learned or was reinforced, just an important thing to remember, that came about as you worked on these? Let's go. Hans, you want to go first?
Yeah, 5 words or less. No, I can't do it in 5 words or less. I can do it.
Morgan, can you do it?
Is that the
But-
challenge?
Yep.
It's 5,
Absolutely.
I don't know if I could do it in 5 words or less.
All kids need play and connections. I don't know.
That's
It's
6, but we'll give
it's
you a
the
pass.
idea. It's the idea of what we did with preschool and elementary just reinforces to me that those same things that we're kind of focusing on with them are just as important as we get into older ages.
We'll
engagement.
just cross out and all kids need play and connection works. Morgan, you want to take a shot at it?
I was just gonna say something along those lines of play. Everyone needs play.
That's perfect. That's 3 words.
Uh.
And you know what? I agree with you, because that's one of the things that's been a good reminder for me. And I think it applies to everybody. I was just in 2 secondary settings this last week that were what would be considered like high intensity, high challenges. And one of the interesting things that continued to come up was the importance of connection. Came up multiple times, the importance of making things fun and helping even secondary age kiddos and post-secondary kiddos have
I like
fun.
that, Linda.
Play. So I think it aligns really nicely from a resilience standpoint, from a connection standpoint. I think that simple takeaway from both of you is a really important reminder. In response to the question about an alternative to the QR code, you can send an email to info@ytry.org, or check for one of the follow-up emails to this, and we'll make sure you get it if the QR code is challenging for you. Otherwise, give a huge round of applause to our panelists. Thank you for the great work that you've done. I'm going to shout out a friend of a friend on here, Andrea Abbott, who is, I had one of your friends reach out to me who was in my grad school cohort and said that you're on here. I believe you're a social worker doing the good work. And so any friend of Haley is a friend of mine. So awesome. Thanks for hopping on, and keep up the good work. And now I'm going to play us out with a little music. Thank you, everybody.